Hello, ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another Doctor Who review. And today's Doctor Who review is none other than The Wheel in Space. So, what happens in The Wheel in Space? Well, the Doctor and Jamie have just said goodbye to Victoria, and they have set off on a brand new adventure, where they're about to meet a new friend of theirs and some old enemies. The beginning of The Wheel in Space shows Jamie being a bit grumpy about the fact that Victoria is gone, and the Doctor tries to help him move on. They both land on a spaceship in the middle of space and essentially start walking around it. But the Doctor gets jump scared by some sort of robot, which must be some sort of cleaning device. Upon being spooked by it, he manages to then put a sheet over it and temporarily blind the machine. The Doctor then ends up hitting his head and is knocked out for 2 episodes. Jamie is pretty much rescued by a space crew on the Wheel, which is a giant ship that is circulating in space. Upon going on the ship, Jamie accidentally decides to destroy their laser. Destroying their laser in turn affects them destroying the meteorites which keep coming at them. However, little does Jamie or the Doctor know, but the Cybermen have started to infiltrate the Wheel. First by using cybermats, which are little mouse-looking things, and they have been pretty much interfering in bits and pieces of recovery of the laser. However, with the blame now put on the Doctor and Jamie as saboteurs, the Cybermen use this as an advantage and begin to recruit 2 astronauts who go back onto the rocket that they saved the Doctor and Jamie from. Turns out the Cybermen were just waiting for their moment and have stowed away onto the Wheel by a crate. What the Cybermen don't take into consideration, however, is the fact that the Doctor knows their ways, and so he begins to try and warn the crew of the Wheel that the Cybermen are coming. But no one knows what the Cybermen are, so, of course, they reluctantly don't agree to help. Well, not until suddenly, mysteriously, it turns out that the laser has been rebuilt. On the Wheel and along the way of the story, the Doctor and Jamie meet Zoe Harriet, a physicist who pretty much has a wide range idea of space and space travel. But she doesn't really know who the Cybermen are, but soon comes to realise that they may be something to do with the saboteur. Over the course of the story, the Doctor and Jamie are told that essentially there's people who don't believe in the Wheel and don't believe it should happen, so hence the Wheel becomes very suspicious of saboteurs. Minus this, however, the Cybermen manage to get on board and they try to poison the oxygen supply. However, the Doctor, with his quick thinking, manages to let the crew use an alternate airwave which will use a force field which will stop the Cybermen from doing this. However, the Doctor has sent Jamie and Zoe off into space in hopes to retrieve his Mercury unit for his TARDIS. But Zoe and Jamie begin to cut it close as meteorites start heading their way and almost end up knocking them halfway across space itself. Once Zoe and Jamie arrive back on the Wheel, the Doctor and his friends must help the people on the Wheel figure out how to stop the Cybermen from using it against the Earth. Down in the loading bay, one of the Cybermen is flung out into space and temporarily locked out. With the help of the laser being back in operation, the Doctor manages to convince the crew to essentially shoot down and destroy the Cybermen's ship. After this, the Doctor and Jamie return to the TARDIS to find a Zoe Harriet stowing away in the Doctor's chest. Zoe is adamant that she doesn't believe she belongs on the Wheel anymore and would like to go somewhere else. She constantly feels like a freak as everyone is constantly referring to her as nothing more than a robot. This is because Zoe Harriet sees things as facts and figures rather than as elements and such and such. She also gets given a bad flack by the crew after the fact that she points out how heavy the meteorites are and how they could destroy the Wheel, and one of the crew members finds it offensive that she's more interested in the fact of the meteorites than she is of the lives of the crew. Zoe also gets annoyed in a part of this episode where essentially she's trying to do a field report back to Earth, and Jamie decides to interrupt midway through, asking her what she's doing. Jamie, having little knowledge of the future or recordings, gets confused when she starts talking into the recording, and he can hear his own voice being played back on the repeat. Jamie also happens to get the Doctor in trouble in this story when essentially he tells the crew that the Doctor's the reason he was told not to destroy the laser, and he can't quite explain it to the crew, although later on in the episode we begin to understand why he didn't want the spaceship destroyed, because it has the Mercury unit. So overall, what did I think of The Wheel in Spaceport? It's a great introduction for Zoe Harriet's character. I also just love the bounce off between Patrick Troughton and Zoe in this idea that, like, Patrick Troughton's Doctor is trying to reassure Zoe that although she can be very clever, she can get things wrong. And that is really affirmed when she goes on about logic, and the Doctor says logic just merely allows you to be wrong with authority. And I like that that's his kind of takeaway. That's his way of trying to teach Zoe a lesson about the universe, and that's not everything is binary and not everything is understandable. So you can't merely use logic just to understand the functions of the universe. I also like the way that he's such a father figure, Patrick Troughton, in almost all of his episodes, especially this one towards Fraser Hines as well sometimes, is that kind of one where he's like the grumpy dad that's like, why did you use me as an excuse? Oh, now I've got to explain myself. I also like that we get a great name drop to John Smith, which is constantly reused in Doctor Who. The idea that Jamie literally gets the idea to call the Doctor John Smith off of the fact that there's a system in the background of a room called John Smith. And then when Jamie gets given a bad look at, he goes, oh, well, I'm sure there's a lot of them. And the woman he's interviewing, Gemma, is just like, yeah, there is. Gemma sadly dies in this episode because she pretty much goes to try and warn the Doctor and the rest of the crew, but the Cybermen get to her first. The one thing I liked about the Cybermen in this episode is rather than it being a brutal killing spree where they just go around massacring people, I like the addition of hypnosis and the way that they pretty much convince the crew to do their bidding along the way. It makes it more impactful and very more solid on what other capabilities the Cybermen have. In many iterations of the Cybermen, it always seems like they're just massacring people. I like that in this story, we have the complete opposite. They have a purpose, they need to achieve it, and they will use people if they have to, just to achieve it. And for that reason, I give The Wheel in Space a solid 8 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next Doctor Who review. Until then, goodbye, stay beautiful, and have an incredible night. Or day. It's day now, isn't it? Yeah.